Well, good afternoon. We call this meeting to order. This is the Flagler County Board of County Commissioners Workshop. It's Monday, June 19th, and we're here in the board chambers. If you'd all please rise and join me in the Pledge to Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now, as we always do, we're going to have a moment of silence to let you reflect on a few things. I think number one is reflect on our great fortune that we're here in Florida, and even greater fortune that we're in Flagler County. But I'd like you to think about our men and women in the armed forces serving around the world, and our first responders here in Flagler County that serve us every single day. A moment of silence, please. Thank you. Well, we're here today to discuss the budget, and Mr. Dance is walking up the ramp. You're excused. So, Ms. Petito, are you going to lead this off, or are we going to have?
I am. So if you'd like, I can go ahead and get started. Thank you all for taking time out of the day to have us present to you the fiscal year 24, what is the board's portion of the general fund budget. Here's a look at the agenda for today's budget workshop. We're going to go over each one of these items in a little bit more detail, but we'll start with taking a look at the board's general fund budget highlights. So as with any budget preparation, we start with a discussion with our department heads and staff, talking about building a budget based on needs, not necessarily taking a look at what you had last year, but taking a look at what we do day in and day out. Is there a better way to do things? Is there a more efficient or cost-effective way? And then really taking a look and building that budget based on needs within each one of the departments. This budget does include increases to COLA, what we had presented to you previously at some of the other workshops, as well as the legislative increases to your Florida retirement system. And then we've already talked a little bit about the health insurance increases per employee, so those are built into this budget. And with every budget, we ask our department heads to submit a detailed budget, and if there's any new costs that are above the prior year, we ask for them to put them in the form of a decision unit so that they can be evaluated and weighted against all of the requests across the various departments. So nothing new there, just the basic highlights of what we do every year. These are some of the budgetary challenges that we all face, including the constitutional officers. We continue to see some inflationary costs rising. I'd mentioned the decision units that were submitted by the departments. They were somewhere around $3 million, $3.5 million in asks from all the different departments. We were able to fund some of them, and those are built into the presentation that we're going to show you, but there is a section of unfunded decision units that total somewhere about $2.3 million. So taking a look at our current staffing levels, we currently have just over 408 FTEs, or full-time equivalents. We currently have 24 vacancies across the board's various departments, and we had a request for about 20 new positions. Obviously, we weren't able to fund 20 new positions. Yes, sir.
In going over the budget, unless I missed it, I couldn't find a way to tie the FTEs to the various lines for departments on salaries. Does that break out anywhere and I'm just missing it, or?
It should be something in the detail I can get with our budget staff and find out exactly how they called it out in your thing. It's probably showing in the line item for salaries, and if you see an increase, they should have written a comment to the right in the comment field that says, new
Well, that was there.
cybersecurity
That was there, but
manager.
I couldn't tell, for instance, how many people that salary line supported, how many FTEs.
We could, in total, we could
Yeah,
give
just
that
for-
to you. I don't know if it's in that document per se. You'd have to actually go into the
I couldn't find it.
budgeted line item, but we can certainly give you a chart, an organizational chart that breaks out each department, and then for multiple departments, break down even a little bit further, like, for instance, in Parks and
Yeah,
Recreation.
well, I don't want to make a big deal out of this because it's kind of getting down into the weeds, but it would give me some kind of sense of what a person costs.
We can certainly,
What does a person cost?
we can certainly do that. I think as part of the budget, we do give you a copy of the positions that have them outlined in what pay category they are and what their salary ranges are, but it might not necessarily tell you how many of each we have. But we can certainly follow up with more detail on your staffing levels.
Well, we have, the line item says 20 requested, so does that mean there's a chance we'd hire 20 more people?
We don't have the money to hire 20.
okay,
So,
that's-
yeah, you'll see it as we go through here, as we bring up each budget. It'll
Yeah.
tell you whether or not they had a funded position included. I think in total, we might have only had, out of the 20, we may have had 3.5 that actually made it into the budget of what we were able to fund.
Right, and my only point is, I think we're understaffed, and I know it's money, it takes money, so, okay.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, just along the same lines, I was checking the other day, and it says here, we've got 24 vacancies and then 20 additional possible requested employees. But if you look at the website as to what jobs are open and they're looking for people to employ them, there was like only 3 or 4 or 5 jobs even listed. So if we have 24 vacancies, not requested, just 24 vacancies, how come you only, when you go to the website, you only see like?
Well, because of money.
Well,
We don't have the
exactly,
money.
But this is the vacancies, the ones that have already been assigned. In other words, so you're saying, we only have enough money to put out an ad to hire 4 or 5 more people?
Right.
No,
That's
that's not
right.
what I'm saying.
No, I don't think that's right.
That's not what I'm saying. When you're looking at this slide, just clearly this slide, your current staffing, you have allocated in your budget 408 positions.
Right.
Currently, we have 24 vacancies.
Right, but those
The
are funded.
20, they're already funded. The 20 is what was requested as part of fiscal year '24's budget. You do not have them all in the budget. We only have about 3.5.
That's not my question.
Your question about the advertisement, for instance.
For the
fire-
vacancies.
For the vacancies, firefighter, paramedic, or firefighter EMT. You may have 5 or 6 or 8 of those making up your 24 vacancies. We're not going to list 8 of the same position. You're going to list it once.
Well, when I read them, it didn't seem like that was the case. But what I'm saying is, if we've got 24 funded vacancies, and we only have 3 or 4 shown as advertised, I was just trying, so that's the explanation is, some of those are multiple.
Some of them, you may have multiple positions with the same title. Some of them could be in various stages of being filled. We have a vacancy, we've made a conditional offer, but the person isn't showing up for a month. It's still considered a vacancy until they're on board. So it could be that they're in various stages. It could be that job postings recently closed and they're not appearing on our website, and we're in the middle of doing an evaluation of those applicants.
Okay.
So you have 24 vacancies in total, and so they're all in various stages. I just bring that to your attention because we're not up to full force right now.
So we're, okay. Okay.
Here's a look at the general fund budget request summary. It actually takes up 2 slides, so this is just part of the list. But it's broken down at a high level, and then we'll go over each one of the departments in a little bit more detail. When you look at administration, it's not just administration of like my office. This includes the commission, it includes administration, it includes legal, and it includes our communications division, all wrapped up as part of the administration. Economic development is a standalone. That position is 1 employee with a percentage of time from the director of TDC. salary coverage there. Your emergency management is just that. Engineering includes your beach work as well. Extension services is a standalone. Financial services, and we'll go into more detail, these are broken out, but it's your Office of Management and Budget, and then your Office of Contracts and Procurement. And then under fire rescue, it's not just fire rescue, it's the administration, it's fire rescue itself, it's got EMS, and it's got fire flight all built into that. General services is your largest department under the board, so you've got your parks, your facilities, your fleet, you've got public transportation, and a couple other, your residential solid waste. Health and Human Services, again, it's a multi-division department. You've got your administration, social services, senior services, adult daycare, congregate meals, and veteran services all wrapped up. And you can see where their adopted budget is from '23 and what they're requesting for fiscal year '24. And then you've got the amount of change in that third column, followed by the percentage of increase or decrease in that last column. And again, we're going to go over these in more detail when we get to the individual department. I don't know if anybody's got any questions yet. Taking a look at the other departments that we have, you've got your human resources, which also covers risk management, innovation technology, which includes not just your IT stuff, but we've created a division for cybersecurity. You've also got your GIS folks, your drones, things like that. Land management, and then library services, that's for both branches, the one in Palm Coast and Bunnell. And then under your miscellaneous others, that includes, it's kind of like a pool of different things. It could be your tax increment financing, your value adjustment board, inmate medical, insurance, medical examiner, any internal charges that relate to the sheriff's office, and then some court-related expenditures. And then you've got your pooled expenditures, which are things that are just that, pooled expense that is across the board. It doesn't lie within one individual department, and that's managed by financial services, and then your interfund transfers as part of the general fund. So that's how it shapes up. When you look at the total from the adopted 23 to the requested 24, it's an increase of about $5.9 million, which equates to 9.7% increase over last year.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Andy?
Andy first.
So in the highlights, 5.3% for COLA, does that equate to I'm curious as to how the percentage or these mandatory increases relate to the percentage increase at the bottom of the column, 9.7. So of the mandatory increases, how much of the 9.7 does that take?
Well, once you add in the 5.3, it's not just affecting your COLA, because you then have to apply it to not just the new FRS rate, but it's a multiplier because it's increasing your salary. So your workers' comp is going up, your FRS is going up, all of your costs, FICA, all of those are going to go up based on that 5.3. So it's not just a 5.3 applied to one line item. And you'll probably see it in more detail when you go into the individual departments, where we break it down into the personnel versus the operating and what that correlation looks like. I don't know that we did the math to show what the 5.3 is across all of the personnel fields. If that's something that you'd like to see, we can certainly do that. I don't know that we broke it out as part of this presentation, but.
Right. I think my point, and it just was me, is out of the 9.7, there's a percentage that are mandatory increases, and I would assume the remaining percentage is the decision units, or things that we're making decisions on above mandatory increases. So is that a possible breakdown?
It's possible. When you say mandatory, it might not be mandatory by the state, but you have contract increases that are baked into your operating. And part of the numbers that you see there aren't just personnel, they're your operating costs. So increase to like your radio user fees. So when we go through, you'll see it as we move forward in the departments. we have a specific budget highlights that'll tell you what the increases within that department are for.
Okay.
So as we go through it, hopefully it
I
becomes
think
a little bit
ultimately, like
clearer.
a pie chart of the 9.7, how that breaks down would be an interesting discussion.
Okay, we can certainly look at that. This is starting with your budget, so.
And I did have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Ms. Sullivan.
I hate to beat a dead horse, but going back to the 24 vacancies, which are funded, so those 24 vacancies are included in this page 3. In other words, they're funded, so they're in the general fund request summary for those various parts of the organization. And all I'm saying is, but we're not paying those people right now because they're vacant. So is there a possible way to look at that year to year? Maybe there's a cost saving in there somehow, or does that just go to reserves, I guess would be my other question.
At the end of the fiscal year, any money that you have remaining in the board's budget, the first thing we do is plug the health insurance fund for whatever salaries that portion of health insurance money that rides in personnel services, that money goes back into the health insurance fund. The remaining money just gets rolled back up into your reserves.
Right.
So if we don't spend it,
I'm
we're not.
thinking of old budget rules and all that, and you're, I don't know, sometimes you can say, how much slop should we have in there if every year we're going to have 24 vacancies? Shouldn't we be more specific on how that money is used? But it's okay, I just want to, that's the way it's used. Okay, I got it.
It gets rolled up into your reserves at the end of the year, and you'll see that as we move
I mean,
further along.
24 people's salaries is not a small number.
We don't normally have that many, and we'd hope that we don't. It's just the challenge is finding people that want to work, number one, and want to work here for the wages that we pay. So again, it's trying to be competitive, and in some positions, we're not as competitive as others, which is why you see it's like a revolving door in some of these areas. So moving forward, we've got the Board of County Commission, and so you'll see that notable budget change in personnel, and this is the Board of County Commission budget. When you look at that COLA increase, you look at that healthcare increase, you look at the changes to FRS, in that budget alone, it's a 10.95% increase running through personnel. So I don't know if that same number is what carries through more or less, being that this is an area that you don't have a lot of movement. We have 5 commissioners. Salaries are based on whatever legislature allows for you. So really all you're getting is the benefit of the COLA, the FRS change, and health insurance. So that equates to a 10.95% increase. When you look at the operating, the only significant change there was putting the money back in for the lobbyists, the money that was cut last year. But even though it was cut, we ended up finding a way to make it work. Part of the stuff that we budget for is worst case scenario, not that we're going to spend it all, but there's money in there for travel and conference. Not everybody goes to all of the conferences. Not everybody stays as long, so you have a savings there. So that's just a look at yours for the Board of County Commission.
Did you remember to back out Mr. Sullivan's and my medical?
We budget for it because it's a calculation that builds the health insurance plan. So it's based on the number of positions, although you two may not elect to take the medical coverage in years moving forward. We don't know if we have elected officials that are going to use it, so we budget for it. And the money just sits in the health insurance fund, so it's not like it's going anywhere. It helps support that fund. So we budget for everybody's health insurance.
Sure, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
On the lobbyists, can you just, I'm not too familiar, I know we have, a federal and a state lobbyist firm?
You have two. You have the federal and the state. The one that we had funded last year was at the state level. We had reduced the funding to the federal lobbyist. We had talked about potentially joining forces with Flagler Beach. We opted not to do that, so we needed to put the money in the budget for the whole amount for this year.
And so do we look at them, when we're looking at this, are they basically, how much are they of the 225,000? Do we know?
So you've got the two lobbyist firms. You've got the state lobbyist, which is $60,000 a year, and then you've got the federal lobbyist, which is $42,000 a year.
And we used the federal last year.
You've
And
used
that's,
both.
that's cheap.
Yeah, we've used both.
I wouldn't work for that money.
Yeah, I just wanted to know exactly what we had for
I'm
lobbyists.
sorry to keep asking a question.
No, Ms. Sullivan.
We're members of Northeast Florida Regional Council and some other councils, and they charge so much for being, does that come out of the same Board of County Commissioners budget?
Yes.
I do know that Northeast Florida Regional Council has not increased their membership fee at all.
Correct.
So in that 31.51% increase, none of that is due to that 44,000. So there must be some other significant increases.
The thing is that in the budget last year, you didn't fund the federal lobbyist. So that is one of the largest things because that was cut. We've had to put that back in. And then there's probably some other, small amounts that make up the difference of that 53,000, so. Taking a
Okay.
look at administration, the notable changes, you've got actually a personnel decrease in cost. That has to do with split funding some positions and moving some FTEs into the communications division, part of their salaries. We also have an increase in the operating side as part of the strategic plan, and we talk about transparency in government and what that looks like. So we have an increase to publications and memberships and transparency software. Overall, it's only a 2% increase in that department. And then looking at communications, in total, in this department, there was the reorganization. You do have a reduction there also of 18,000 with a decrease of about 4.8%. Again, this is part of the reorganization, best utilization of staff. And then some operating expenditures were moved to IT as they related a little bit closer to the IT function. Then you can look at the county attorney's office. They've got a flat operating budget over last year, so there's no increase there. There is an increase in personnel of about 6.78%, which averages out to just a 6% overall in their budget. Here's a look at economic development. You have an increase there in personnel. That's attributed to the benefits increase for personnel costs. On the operating side, you do have a slight increase of close to 14,000. Again, this is part of the strategic plan with marketing our community as being open for business and creating collaborative marketing materials for economic development. It also includes some economic modeling software that we can utilize with Palm Coast. So when we're evaluating the value of bringing in a business and what does that look like, this is a tool that we can use to kind of capture what that added value of that business is. And then some employee development training conferences as well.
Is this over and above what the bed tax brings in?
Bed tax does not go into economic development, so this is strictly economic development.
Got it. Thank you.
But economic development does offset Amy's salary. So when you look at that personnel cost, it's not just the cost of the one employee, it is a portion of Amy Lukasik, the Director of Tourism.
So that makes it hard to get at what I'm trying to get at, and that's what is in one of those lines. What is that? How many people does that support? So that's maybe supports 1 1/3.
Like 1.3,
Something like that.
something like that, yeah.
Okay, all right, got it.
This is a look at emergency management. When you look at the change over last year, it is a $77,000 increase. Personnel making up about 40 to 41,000, 7%. And then the operating of about 36,000 or 24% of the budget. The changes to this budget, the increase in radio user fees, This is an area that you'll see coming up in anybody that works in public safety side. The Board of County Commission had been subsidizing this fund about $2 million. So we've put the cost where it should be allocated, which is in some of these departments and cities. So you have an increase in the radio user fees, you've got increase in FPL rates, and then this past year, there was a need to create some additional climatized storage at the vehicle storage building, which sits outside of the EOC. So with that, you have additional FPL costs there, so.
The radio charges, is that part of the Motorola budget, contract?
The contract went up, that is part of it, and so a lot of those costs associated with running that system had gone up. However, it had never gone out to the individual users to pay their proportionate share,
got
so we've had to relook at that fund. I believe we brought that forward at the last meeting, where we went over that, and we had to increase them where it's like maybe almost doubled or tripled in some cases.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. This is a look at engineering, and you can see in personnel, it's gone up about $44,000 or 4%. Operating went up about $23,000. It's an increase of 64%. And the changes in that budget are primarily due to the switch to leasing vehicles. So they've got a couple vehicles that are going to be coming up for lease. Also increase in membership fees and their copier. And then employee development. And as you recall, last year when we were looking for cuts at during the budget process, one of the things that we hit from most of the departments, if not all of the departments, was employee development and training opportunities and travel. So this is putting back some of the money that was cut out of their budget last year. Some of these are required as CEUs in order to maintain their credentialing. So we would ask that this stays intact. This is a look at the extension services budget. Again, just a slight increase. We did meet with the IFAS director and had talked about the need for adding another agent out there that would serve the role of family consumer science agent. We only pay a portion of that salary, so you see a slight increase there for that coverage there. So again, it's a $19,000 increase, about 5% of the budget. The O&B, or Office of Management and Budget, is part of your finance team. You can see there's actually a reduction in personnel costs. That's primarily because we did some reorganization of personnel, where we had some folks that were working in finance that were moved back to the departments. So you've got a finance and grants person that's now in general services and one that went back to your HHS department. So when you look at this, slight increase in operating for contracts, and then overall it's a decrease of about $136,000 or 15%. This is a look at your OPC, or Office of Procurement Contracts, again, part of finance. Slight increase in personnel costs, larger increase in the operating, and that again is related to the decision to lease vehicles. So we've got 2 vehicles that are going to be leased out of this division. Overall, it's a $31,000 increase, or 4.3%. Whoops. Probably a little quick on that one. This is a look at fire rescue administration, increase in personnel of about $313,000, 18%. Operating went up about 77. When you look at it, it's the realignment of personnel. You've got a position that's currently in your warehouse that's going to be moved over to fire rescue to help maintain their logistics, medications, things that were previously dispensed out of your warehouse. Fire rescue essentially will have their own warehouse. So it was the reallocation or realignment of one personnel there. Again, increase in radio user fees. And then there's 4 vehicles that are going to be leased out of this division. Here's a look at fire rescue, the fire side of fire rescue. Personnel, you've got a little over $1 million increase, almost 1.1 million, which equates to about 20% increase. You've also got operating increase of about 176,000. And then it's a capital decrease, but that was due to us buying a lot of trucks this current year. And next year, they've only got a few pieces of equipment. The notable things with fire rescue is you're going to be taking on half of the year for your SAFER grant. That runs out in March, I believe, of 2024. So you're going to be having to cover half of that. That's the largest portion of your budget increase here. And then again, you've got the same radio user fees and repairs to equipment and the training tower. These are where you'll see the funded decision units. Largely, these are for some much-needed replacement of aged equipment, including capital outlay for a replacement of a utility task vehicle and a technical rescue vehicle. Some of that other equipment is the fire hose replacement, extrication tools, thermal imaging equipment, things like that. Because you had such a high amount going into capital last year, it's not really reflecting in much of an increase. It's really just shown as that 3.7. Here's a look at the EMS side of fire rescue. Again, you know, personnel changes is about 518,000, a little under 10%. Your operating increase is 111,000 or 10%. Capital here went up significantly, and that's due to the replacement of 3 ambulances. Again, increase in radio user fees, increase in narcotics and some of those drugs and supplies that we use out in the field. So the net result is about a $1.5 million increase, equating to about 23%.
When we replace those rescue vehicles, do we get any value out of the 3 that we're replacing?
They're going to become spares. Right now, you're low on your spare units, so we like to maintain a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 ratio. So for every frontline unit you have a spare unit for when they go down or if they get in an accident or need to be serviced. So you won't be getting rid of anything.
Okay, thanks.
One of the proposals that came in the way of a decision unit, what they're experiencing now in fire rescue is a huge increase in call volume in Palm Coast on the rescue side. So right now, Station 92, which is at the airport, 21, which is behind Coles, those 2 are the busiest stations. So what the thought was, one of the decision units was to step up an additional rescue above what you currently have, house it at Station 25, which sits right there on Belterre, south of Lehigh Trail. We're not able to fund, right now, looking at the budget, we're not able to fund an expansion unit. But what we were looking at is potentially utilizing one of the spares, not having a 2-to-1 ratio of replacement, but more of a 3-to-1 ratio of spare units to frontline, stepping up another rescue unit where you would pull a 3rd person off of the truck to step up a rescue that would have 2 people on it. So that way we're not incurring any additional expense from personnel or from capital. You will have a slight increase, obviously, in your gas, but if it's deferring calls from one unit to another, you would think that it's a wash. So that's kind of a thought with something that we're looking at with the EMS side for next year. Again, it's really indicative of the call volume, and like I said, bringing on a 3rd rescue to support those 2 halfway in between would definitely help. So, fire rescue, this is flight operations or fire flights budget. Slight increase there with the personnel costs. You also have an increase in the operating, then capital. Again, radio user fees, there are some required FAA renewals and publications that we have to do. Another department that's going to be looking to lease a vehicle rather than purchase as part of that rolling stock replacement. And then the ask was for an overhead hoist for when they're doing the maintenance on the helicopter. We currently don't have one, and it's my understanding that it's quite a feat to take the rotor off to do some maintenance. It actually takes a couple people out of service, and they're working manually to lift the propeller off while they hopefully don't damage it. So it would definitely make sense that we invest in this overhead hoist. Would cut down the amount of time needed to do the repairs and maintenance on the equipment, and also help minimize some of that risk involved in damaging it.
And just, Mr. Chairman, we'll talk about helicopter replacement, putting
It's
money
at the
away.
very
That's later
end.
on, right? And
It's at the very end of this, yes, sir.
And I don't know how they're operating without a hoist now. I mean, that's,
Very carefully.
yeah, we
Yeah.
really need that. I mean, what building would it go in?
It would go in the Fireflight hangar where they
Oh, right in there.
house
Okay,
the,
good.
yeah.
I noticed that one of the things with the new Sheriff's Operations Center logistically, they made a big deal about that when we were touring, about the fact they can lift the vehicle off the ground with the equipment that they have there now, which is a big saving and, personnel especially getting underneath and that kind of thing. So it's a big deal.
Certainly. This is a look at your General Services Administration. You have a slight increase there to personnel, about $208,000. As you recall, that was a large part of reorganizing and moving that one position out of financial services, the folks that deal with finance and grants, putting it back into the department to really work on those transportation grants. And then the operating has got a slight reduction. So overall, $206,000 increase, or 26%. Here's a look at your General Services Fleet Management. Another slight increase in personnel, going up 8.5%. Operating, going up about 19,000, 16%. And then the big ask here is for, under capital, is a lift replacement, which is, an increase of about $44,000. Again, increase in radio user fees. We've got folks that are going to be leasing vehicles rather than purchasing them directly. And then increase vehicle repair costs because we do have an aging fleet, and we've got a list of equipment that we need to convert to leased. And then that funded decision unit is for a lift replacement. It's actually one of two lifts that needed to be replaced. We actually had equipment failure this year where we had I believe it was a rescue up on a lift. And it was the old chain type lift, and the lift failed. And we had an employee working on a rescue at the time. So these lifts are 25 plus years old. They don't make them like this anymore. We were able to replace one of them this year with some existing funds within the department, just reprioritizing. But we needed to make sure that we included the replacement of this one. And then moving forward, making sure that we've got this type of equipment covered under annual inspection and maintenance.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
On the lease vehicles, just a general question. When we talked about going to leasing vehicles this year, and I think it's we decided it's the right thing to do, it was supposed to, eventually, it's kind of a neutral, right? In other words, compared to the way we were doing it before, the way we're doing it now, we weren't going to leases because it was going to save money, but I thought it was going to be kind of even. In other words, we wouldn't be having increases because of this over the way we were doing it before. So is this just the startup extra charges at the beginning, or?
No. So when we brought it forward to you, you've got 120 vehicles that you need to replace that are part of your rolling stock replacement. What we brought forward to you when we kicked it off was the start, which was only 40 vehicles. You have 120. So what we're trying to do is phase in all 120. We started with the 40, and now we're bringing on more. So you're going to see gradual increases over probably a 4 or 5 year period until we get all of them transitioned to the lease. And then moving forward, it would just be a flat budget. It would just be a recurring.
Right, and part of it because you less maintenance and things like that.
And then along with that, you would have less operating costs in your maintenance,
But it's
yes.
going to take a while before we get to the point where it's kind of back to,
It'll take at least 5 years.
5 years,
Because
okay.
we don't have the funding to do all 120 at once. So we did 40, and we took a look at anything that was older than 2017. We still have some vehicles that are prior to 2017 that we haven't changed out as part of that 40, because when they look at it, they're not just taking your oldest vehicles, they're doing a combination of some older, some newer, when they're trying to offset what that cost is and how much they can get for that vehicle, the value coming back. They try to match it up where it becomes even, so they take some good with the bad, so when they take them on and sell them and offset your lease payment, it kind of levels it out. So we've got quite a bit to
For that 5-year
go.
period, do you have an idea of how much increase it is each year on average?
We have it factored in, I could probably bring it up, it's a different conversation, but
It's a different, yeah, I know. I don't need the answer right now.
I can give it to you. We have a whole schedule of your 5-year rolling stock replacement, which I can share with you if we haven't done it already. So here's a look at your public transportation. You've got your personnel going up about 168,000, your operating going up 62,000. The net increase there is about 230 or 9.5%. And these are some of the notable budget changes as it relates to your Section 5307 grants, increase in radio user fees. You've got 2 office staff vehicles that will be converted over to a lease. And then the vehicle repair actually has gone up on some of your buses. This is a look at your general services facilities. This is an area where,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I keep asking, Mr. Chairman. On the public transportation, since I'm involved with that, a lot of the money we use to support that program are grants from the state. So do these numbers include those grants?
this is the total budget, so your grants would be the offset. So naturally, your general fund contribution to this department is not the 2.6 million, it would be much less. It's probably maybe 650,000. 2 million of it might be in grants. I'd have to look at their revenue. So when we display it in the budget book, when you actually see the department in the budget book, you'll have those offsetting grants.
Offsets, okay. Yep, okay.
So here's a look at your facilities. You're looking at increase of about 165,000 in personnel. Operating has gone up 323,000. Capital outlay has gone up about 110. So the total on that is somewhere about 600,000. It's almost a 17% increase overall. Again, this is a department that's got some of those leased vehicles coming on. You also have an increase in building material costs for maintenance and construction. The decision units that were funded were to replace the energy plant, the pump and motor, and the VFD, or the variable frequency drive replacement. And that's shared between the energy plant provides not just cooling for this facility, but also the courthouse. So half of this expense runs through facilities to cover the court side, and then the other half runs through the GSB. So this is only half of that expense. And then capital outlay is for the replacement of a Bobcat, which is used throughout many of our projects. This is the other half, or the sharing side of the GSB, which is the Government Services Building. So you see those same increases where you have the pump and VFD replacements. You also have increase to the property insurance rates, which is something we talked about previously, and then an increase to the elevator and chiller repairs. And one of the things that we need to start budgeting for and focusing on is the replacement of the chillers and the cooling tower, which is over at the energy plant. So it's something that, as more time goes on, coming up with a plan and making sure that we've got the funding in place so that we can replace that over time. So we still have a couple years, but just wanted to mention that as we're working through the budgets. Here's a look at your general services, parks and recreation facilities. You've got a slight increase in your personnel of almost 8%. Your operating is up by almost 15%. Capital went down, and then your grants and aids had gone down. So the biggest decrease, I guess, there would be that your park master plan came out of last year's funding, so that's the decrease in your grants and aids of about 100,000. Your increases are due to preservation and maintenance items. You also have a new grounds maintenance contract that's going to be awarded. I believe it's on tonight's agenda. And then you've got your vehicles that are going to be leased, and then those radio user fees. And then your decision unit in this department was to be able to do some of that preservation work, which is really court resurfacing. It's the replacement of some flooring at a community center. You also have a dump trailer, some mowers, and a pull-behind trailer that are needed. And that's it for that one. I mean, overall, it is a slight increase of less than 1%. But again, that's largely because the Parks Master Plan was a one-time cost and not included there. This is a look at your vessel registration. So this is one that you don't necessarily control. It's based on the number of boats, and a portion of those proceeds come back to us in the way of vessel registration funds. And it's used for like channel markers, signs, things like that at any of your boat launch facilities. This is really just the maintenance side of it. There's another portion of this that's held in reserve. So if we have a project that maybe it's a fine grant or something like that, and we need a match, we use that as a match. Usually it's about 100,000 that we accumulate, but this is the operating side, which is part of the ongoing maintenance of your boat ramp facilities. This is a look at the general services Carver budget, not to be confused with the Parks Carver budget. But this here is really for your janitorial costs. Or I'm sorry, this is, I think it's just a new title for this one. Your janitorial costs have gone up, but this is the one that we contract with the school board to provide the day-to-day operation. And that's what you see in that grant and aid. That's the amount of money we give to the school board to manage and operate the facility, and then the operating, we cover the operating costs. So you do have a slight increase there of almost 25%.
Just a quick question on that, on Carver Center, what the contribution of the school board is, they man it? Is that their contribution?
They provide a contribution. I want to say it's either 10 or 15,000 a year. It's the same. Bunnell pays 10 or 15,000 a year, and then out of that total. So the total budget's 162 for next year. I believe you get a total of 30. So you get 15 from Bunnell, 15 from the school board. That offsets that 162. The rest is all paid for by you. The grants and aid is the line item where we're paying the school board to actually manage it for us.
Okay.
Bull Creek Fish Camp, you do have a slight increase there. Personnel going up a little bit, and then your operating going up a little bit. Not much of an increase. It's primarily due to utility cost increases and some other contracted services that are being performed out there.
Shouldn't there be a decrease of some sort that we don't have the building?
The building costs were borne by the restaurant person, so it doesn't really do anything to us. It's the cost of running the restaurant were paid for by the restaurant, so it never ran through our budget. We weren't subsidizing the restaurant. So the costs that you have out at Bull Creek are for the bathroom, it's for individual campsites, it's for the water system. all of those things that support the campers and the day visitors.
And the money that we got from the restaurant.
It's
Didn't-
just an
didn't go into
offsetting,
here.
it's an offsetting revenue. So on the budget page in your budget book, when we talk about, you know, you have different revenue sources that come in addition to general fund, that's where you'll see that impact.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it doesn't affect our operating per se, but you will see it in the form of revenue. So this is your Princess Place budget. So in your personnel, you've got a slight increase, 22,000, a little over 6%. Your operating went down. And
I don't
that's,
know, just quick question about Princess Place.
Yes.
There's a problem with the old swimming pool there. They were supposed to put in some kind of fence around it. Would that, if we were going to do that fence, would it come out of this part of the budget or the capital budget? You know, where would that show up?
it's probably listed on your capital CIP budget as unfunded.
Okay, just wondering.
We talked about applying for a grant. We haven't been successful in getting one. The pool itself needs to be restored. It's got the original construction and sometime, might have been in the 70s during the Wadsworth ownership. They had gone over it with some metal mesh and kind of like a plaster coating. It's all popping off.
It's just a lot of kids run around out there, and there's no fence there now. So just a point.
Yeah, there hasn't been as long as we've owned it.
Oh, I know.
But it is something that we talked about, redoing the pool and then putting up some fencing around there. We haven't, like I said, we haven't been successful in getting a grant for that, but it's definitely on our radar. So you do have a slight increase there at Princess Place. And then this is a look at your cottages. So we've got a slight decrease in the operating costs there. So we're looking at tentative budget for next year at $76,000, which is a $27,000 decrease over the prior year. And this is really based on actuals. When you look at the revenue, the offsetting revenue for these are cottages. The revenue does offset the expense. So like if you look at last year, fiscal year 22, we brought in almost $98,000 in revenue. If you look at fiscal year 21, we brought in $122,000 in revenue. Right now, year to date, and we're not done with the year, you're already at $70,000 in revenue, offsetting revenue. So when you're looking at a budget of $76,000 for next year, you've already brought in $70,000 this year, and we're not done with the year. So this is something that, you know, does pay for itself, those 3 cottages that you have out there. This is Health and Human Services, or our HHS administration. You've got a slight increase there in personnel, slight increase in your operating. So you're looking at a total increase of $58,000, or just under 13%. Again, this is the other half of that reorganization where we took a person out of 2 positions out of financial services. One went to general services, one went to HHS. And they handle all the financial grants. And then they've got 1 vehicle being added to the lease program. Then you've got the human services side of HHS. You've got a slight increase in personnel. Operating went down a little bit. You've got some state mandated costs going up and public assistance staying the same. So this past year, you're only going to be seeing about an increase of 1%, $28,000. We did receive an additional $5,000 for indigent burial, and then the Medicaid reimbursement had also gone up slightly. So that should negate some of that $28,000 expense, at least maybe $11,000 or $12,000 of it. This is a look at senior services. Again, slight increase in personnel. You have an increase in your operating. Total increase of $204,000 or 23%. The biggest change here is you do have an increase in grant funding, so that will offset that offsetting revenue will work towards that 204. So instead of having a $204,000 increase, it should only probably be about maybe $29,000 increase. And you've got a vehicle that's going to be leased in this department. Here's a look at the adult daycare, part of HHS. You've got an increase in personnel of $30,000, increase in operating of $2,500. So you're looking at a total increase of, roughly $32,000, 9% over last year. The biggest thing there is an increase in utility expense with FPL. And then there was a decision unit to replace some equipment and some furniture, mobility furniture at this location. So that's another reason why it had gone up a little bit. Your congregate meals, slight increase in personnel, small increase in the operating side of things. You're looking at a $7,700 increase or 2%. And the biggest change here was the increase on the operating, which is really a rent utility increase from Church on the Rock. They increased the amount that you're having to pay towards the utilities, which is, I think, $700 of that $800 increase in your operating. This is a look at your veteran services. They've got a flat operating budget, flat grant and aid. So really it's just an increase in those personnel costs. $14,000. Overall, it ends up being a 7.9, almost an 8% increase. This is a look at human resources, broken out by your personnel increase at $57,000, your operating going up almost to $75,000. Total increase of 131, 18.5%. And this is to add a leased vehicle to the replacement schedule and also equipping staff with cell phones and mobile hotspots. And then funding a decision unit that came forward that really talks about employee development and leadership training. Here's a look at your innovation technology. You've got a slight increase in personnel there, and that's largely because of the request for a decision unit. There was a request for a junior database administrator to be added to the budget. You also have a decrease in the operating expense. And that's really in part because we created and stepped up a new division for cybersecurity. So some of those costs were realigned to that new division. You also have equipment and non-capital that was moved out of this department into an IT replacement fund. I believe we talked about that at an earlier workshop. And then the realignment of some of those costs that were in the communications part of admin that pertained really to IT, they were moved into this department. So overall, you're not seeing much of an increase, but it's because you've got a lot of that movement there. The other request here was for a drone. And as you know, our drones currently we're not able to utilize because they're not American-made. There was a request to add a drone back in, so. Here's a look at the cybersecurity. Again, this is the newly formed or newly created division as part of IT. There was a decision unit that we did fund at this point for a new position, and this would be for what they refer to as an ISM, but it's an Information System Security Manager. And then it's the realignment of those operating costs for cybersecurity that were moved into this. So this essentially would be for two positions. We had Carly, which was funded out of the other one. She'll be moved over here, and then this is the addition of a second position. Here's a look at your public safety software. So this is essentially your CAD software, which is for public safety. We do have personnel that are in this division. So you see a slight decrease there. Operating did go up, and that's because of some contract increases to those software. Tyler New World, Socrata, LiveScan Global. There is offsetting revenue to this particular fund. So when we talk about the contribution from the sheriff or the cities, there is offsetting revenue to this CAD fund. So when you're looking at that $765,000, about $100,000 of it comes from the sheriff. And then collectively between Bunnell, Flagler Beach, and Palm Coast, you've got another $33,000. So about $133,000 is offsetting of that 765. This is an area that we identified that maybe we're not capturing the total cost of this. However, we do have interlocals with those cities that will not allow us to renegotiate the terms for a couple years. So I believe it's 2025 is when we're going to be looking to increase these rates to the individual license holders. There is a different cost for law enforcement over fire rescue personnel with CAD. So we're going through that process now, identifying what those costs are, what they're currently paying, what we anticipate them to pay when we go to restructure that new agreement with them. This is a look at land management. You got a slight increase there in personnel, slight increase in operating. Overall, it's a $42,000 increase, 8%. The biggest cost increase there is really to be able to do the Betty Steflik boundary amendment. It's a requirement of our land management agreement with the state. We're not compliant. We've been out of compliance for some time. This would allow us to redo the boundary amendment. When we took on a portion of Betty Steflik outside of the original footprint, there was a requirement with the land management to be able to provide certain amenities in that new section. Well, that new section you can't get to other than by water. So by redoing the boundary amendment and incorporating what we know to be all of Betty Steflik, you will fulfill the requirement at the state level, but there's a cost associated with doing that boundary amendment. So some of you may recall when we acquired Betty Steflik, it was over different portions. There's not one document that joins all of those properties together as a boundary survey of what Betty Steflik looks like. So the requirements that we have on this one piece are the furthest to the south that you do not get to. So it would require us to either make significant improvements that would you could only get to by water or by doing this boundary amendment, bring us into compliance, but there is a cost to doing that. So that is in the budget for next year, and then there is some canal maintenance required out at Bull Creek. So that's also built into this budget.
I know this may or may not be true, Mr. Chairman, but maybe this is another example of how we help out Flagler Beach by doing something like this, defining the borders there with Betty Steflik, so it helps them too.
Well, didn't our Flagler Beach kind of usurped part of our land, and we had to swap the land to get us whole again with Betty Steflik, right? They
Yep.
inadvertently fenced off part of the park.
But
think-
well,
I
I'm just
think-
saying,
I
it's
recall.
an indication where we support this and help out Flagler Beach to a degree.
Well, we definitely have 3 recreational amenities within their city limits,
Yeah.
whether it's Wadsworth Park, Betty Steflik Preserve, or the Moody Boat Launch. I think the argument could be made that you have 3 recreational amenities within the city limits. I think what you're talking about, though, was the encroachment on the property around Public Works
Right.
and those buildings right there.
They kind of
We
took
did a
over part
land
of our
swap,
land.
correct. They encroached, so we did a land swap to acquire some other property that is along the water. But this would be to kind of clean up that boundary amendment to make
Okay.
it one contiguous
I'm
thing.
just saying, it's not hurting. Okay.
This is a look at your natural resource land. This is an area that is controlled through land management, so you've got a slight increase there for your, a decrease, slight decrease in your operating of about 119,000. You've got a slight increase with the capital, and that's related to whether or not they go forward with the lease or purchase of equipment. And then you've got some financial and perpetual assurances that are required on some of your ESL properties. So overall, it's a decrease of about 109,000, or a decrease of about 10%. This is a look at your library services in Palm Coast. Overall, personnel going up about 177,000, operating going up slightly, and then your capital. The notable increase with this position was adding back a person to the library. As you know, this past year, we ended up pulling Holly out of the main library to bring her over to administration to work on strategic plan, to help with our transparency, and she's actually overseeing communications as well as library. So her day is totally consumed, and we never had a replacement for her back in that department. Not that the library assistant, too, is her replacement. We've elevated and created tiers of branch managers and assistant branch managers with some of her librarians that she had on staff. But this was a need to backfill a position at a lower level to provide adequate coverage. We also have the replacement of a passport camera in there. There's an increase to electric, FPL, and water, also adding in a leased vehicle. And then that capital outlay is really library materials. So when you look in total, it's about $218,000 increase, or 15, almost 16%. This is a look at your library in Bunnell. And this one is going up slightly. Your personnel went up. Your operating went down a little bit. You are seeing a slight increase overall, $25,000, almost 15%. The big expense here is the monthly rent that currently pays. As you know, it was occupying the space that's currently being used by SMA with our access center. The decision was made to temporarily relocate them into a storefront that pays rent until we can construct the new facility. So that operating budget includes the rent, but it is an overall decrease. They were able to cut some funding to be able to manage that. And then again, the capital outlay is primarily the library materials. And those are kind of a standard every year, where there's a small amount anticipated to replenish the materials. Here's a look at your pooled expenditures. These are things that hit multiple departments, so they're managed through financial services. You've got an increase in the operating a little bit. You've got a slight increase to grants and aids. Debt service is staying the same. So overall, increase of $198,000, 5.5%. The biggest part of this budget increase is the inmate medical that went up by $270,000, and then an increase to those radio user fees that are paid out of this fund.
I should know this, but why does that medical fee show up in our budget?
You have a requirement to pay for the medical for inmates once they're housed in your jail. It's my understanding the sheriff covers a portion before they're booked, and then once they're booked, they're yours. And so that is the portion that you pay.
And just to follow up on, I can't help it, that's based on the fact the sheriff briefed us that they expect the inmate population to rise this coming year, right? So is that 270, take that into account?
This is based on actuals and any contract increase costs. So typically when we build the budget, we base it on actuals. We do take into account if there are some known things, but obviously we can't expect everything. So when we do this, we typically look at, what has been historically the trend, what have we seen, what do we anticipate as contract costs, kind of estimate. But again, we would have no way of knowing every intimate detail to what to expect. So, sometimes it's your best guess based on the data that you have. So it doesn't necessarily take into account his population increase.
Okay.
This is a look at your interfund transfers. This account is going up about 840,000 or 16.7%. But the big changes here, we talked about creating that property insurance, that new self-insured risk fund. Rather than paying for the increase in premiums, we had talked about taking a portion of the potential increase and creating an internal fund. It's really just a savings account that we hope we don't have to use. But this is the start of creating that self-insured risk fund. There's also the new transfer of non-ad valorem revenue to help cover the debt service on the Sheriff's Operations Center. And then the increase for the creation of the new IT replacement fund. Some of that money was moved out of the IT budget. Added to it was some new general fund revenues, and that's going in here. But the good thing is the decrease, that we talked about, that we were subsidizing about $2 million to that radio fund. This is seeing a decrease there because we had been subsidizing that. We're able to recoup almost 1.2 million of that, and then kind of offset some of those increases that we're seeing. So this is your tax increment financing. So these are your costs that are associated with the 4 CRAs that exist, Palm Coast, Bunnell, Flagler Beach, and Marineland. You are going to see an increase next year of about 184,000 based on the current property valuation. It may go up, probably will. The most, significant change is that this will be the first time that Bunnell is actually going to be receiving a payment of their CRA.
Is there a state equation that, that allows us to figure out what we pay each of these entities each year?
There is, at the time of creation of the CRA, it's kind of capped at whatever the value of the property is, and then you're paying the delta. So as property values increase, that can go up or go down, fluctuate from year to year. So this is based on whatever that percentage of property valuation increase is. There is a term for the CRAs, typically might be 30 years. So depending on when they came on and when they go off, that's definitely a factor.
I'm on the CRA for Marineland, and I just noticed that 2 years ago they got 0. Last year they got 71,000, and then this year they're getting 54,000, I think. So I was just curious how that number gets
It's
arrived at.
possible that the year that they got 0, the value was either the same or less than the time when the CRA was created. So as your property values drop, if it's less than whenever it was created, then it would be 0 because you wouldn't get anything.
Yeah, it had been 0 for several years. So the first time they got money was last year.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was, okay, thanks.
Yep. This is the budget for your value adjustment board. This is just really a placeholder for some funding to cover any of those anticipated operating expenses that may come as a result of utilizing that value adjustment board. Otherwise, it's just flat. There's a slight increase to the medical examiner's budget, and that's the 5% increase for that contract. And then there was a request for an additional $20,000 for transport fees based on, historical use and what some of those expenses look like. So you're looking at an $85,000 increase, almost 16% in that fund. This is a look at your insurance. So we talked about this before, about your property insurance. When we did the survey of all of our properties, took a look at those premiums going up, we kind of took the approach of, okay, how do we negate some of that cost increase? What can we do differently? So this is when we took a look at creating that self-insured risk fund for properties that are less than $1 million in value and holding that money in that separate account. So that's where you saw that 250,000 being moved out. We are able to reduce the expense here. We are able to reduce it a little bit further by moving those properties out. So you see a reduction here. And then some of these expenses were actually moved into some of these other budgets as well, so.
I've got a quick question.
Yes,
Yes, sir. Heidi, remind me again what we save by doing the self-insurance on the properties under $1 million. What was the, do you remember the ballpark we save yearly?
Off the top of my head, I want to say it might have been 700,000, 7 or 500,000. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look at my numbers. The thought with that was it was going up. I think that if I remember correctly, I think that the quote that we had received, and again, it wasn't a final quote. We were expecting the final number to come in probably August or September. I want to say it was like a $700,000 increase that we were going to be experiencing, and by us being able to reduce items that were either $1 million or less, and then we also took out contents. We took out the PETO, which is the property out in the open or in the open. When we restructured our coverage, we were able to save, I want to say, a little over maybe 500,000. And then we were going to take half of that, which is the 250 that we allocated to start setting up a self-insured risk fund for property insurance.
Do we have a list of the properties identified?
We do. I believe I sent that. If not, I can send it again. It was a list of all the ones we're keeping and all the ones that we were no longer covering. It doesn't include things at the airport, and it didn't include things that were part of the radio system. Anything that was an enterprise fund, if you will. I was really just looking at things that affect the general fund, but I can certainly send that out again.
Thank you.
Yep. This is a look at those internal charges that we have that run through related to the sheriff's office. This account did go down slightly, so it's got a reduction of about 7%. The maintenance budget is now split out with the new IT maintenance agreement. Property insurance had been previously budgeted within the insurance fund. But then you've also got like your fleet repair, your facilities repair, and some of those CAD costs. We cover those. So this is just an internal fund that we're able to charge for some of those things. And this is a look at your law enforcement education funds. The expenditures in this are really based on whatever revenues come in. So again, this is a tentative budget. It's an increase based on whatever earned revenues we think we're going to get. These funds are available to the sheriff to be able to be used for various things. And then the next few slides are going to be more of your court-related services and expenses. Not all of these are you required to provide, although the board has been generous in providing them. This is your court services. It's going up $2,500, which is really to replace some of the furniture, not all of the furniture, but as needed, maybe chairs, tables, things like that. This is your pretrial services supervision. Again, slight increase, $6,400. This is an increase for travel expenses and conferences for that employee. You've got a flat budget for your state attorney's office, $26,000. You've got a flat budget for your public defender, $3,000. Your guardian ad litem, which has a decreased operating budget based on actuals, and then a slight increase in personnel. And then here's a look at our budget with the constitutionals. So if you look at the total increase, wrapping up all of the board side at that increase from 61 million up to 67, or roughly 5.9 million, as it compares to the others, we're at a 9.7% increase overall. When you look at the total combined of your other constitutional officers, it's an increase of about 12%, or $13 million. As you know, the estimated value of property increased by a little over 12. It increased at, I believe it was 12.83%. What this doesn't take into account, even though it's showing a 12% increase, it doesn't really give you a lot of capacity to refill your reserves, your general fund reserves, the contingency operating reserves that you have, as well as your 2/12. So what this number does not reflect right now is the estimated $6 million that needs to go back into those funds to pay for the things that you took money out for this year. I say that because I didn't want you to think that this is a balanced budget by any means right now. I'm just showing you what the BOCC side looks like in comparison with the others. And right now you still have about $6 million in operating that we're going to have to figure out. Now, some of this could be offset by the formal property valuation, which we won't know until July 1st. So once that number becomes available to us, we'll be able to dive into this a little bit better. We're going to continue to evaluate the requests and see where we can, save money or reallocate some of this money. But the picture will definitely become a little bit clearer once we get those certified values on July 1.
With the informal numbers that you have in all of this, where are we, just back of the napkin, where do we stand on a millage, from a millage standpoint?
Right now, you have, so you're at 12.83 right now. The budget as requested by everybody is 12%, so you really only have the 0.83, which is somewhere about $1 million. I'd say roughly maybe somewhere between 880 and $1 million. We've got $6 million that still needs to be plugged into the reserve, so we still got a deficit of about $5 million that we need to plug back into the reserve. So I'm thinking that you hopefully maybe have a property valuation increase of another 4 or 5%. That would make us whole without having to make any further cuts or adjustments.
So that gets close to flat millage.
That would get us to what we need to cover everything without increasing millage. It would just be based on property valuation at that point. So if there's no other questions, the next part that we're going to go over is the capital funds. So this is a summary of all of the capital funds and how they're broken out, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail on each one of these, on what they cover, what they're used for. You have a slight increase in the capital fund request over next year, just under 1%, but we'll take a look and see what they are. So the first one is your Beachfront Parks Capital Fund 1307. This is the account for improvements related to the Malacompra, the Hammock DRI. So these funds are restricted. They can only be used within that Hammock DRI Malacompra footprint. Minimal operating costs, mainly probably for financial audit purposes. There are no new projects scheduled for next year, so you see the money just sitting in reserves. Again, it's restricted in its use. It can only be used beachside Hammock DRI. The next one is also Beachfront Parks. It's the other side of Hammock DRI, which is restricted to maintenance. So this one here is your recreational facilities. Again, no real new projects scheduled for next year in that area, so you do see a decrease in that fund. This is a look at your half-cent discretionary sales tax, which is your Fund 1311. You do see a slight increase next year in this fund, about 7.5%. In this fund, you've got $3 million going out for the jail operating expense. And then that other $2.5 million that you see going out for capital improvements, that is going towards your fire rescue facilities. As you know, we haven't gotten the paperwork for the grant agreement yet, but part of the budget signed by the governor was a $10 million appropriation for a fire station in Bunnell with the admin headquarters. So that 2.5 would be mirrored up with that on that project for either, could go towards the purchase of property. It could also go towards the construction of the project. So we have that in there now as a placeholder for that project to try to make that project whole. This is a look at your general fund capital projects. This is your Fund 1316, a slight increase of $105,000, almost 13%. The projects that we have slated coming out of this fund, they were listed on your CIP schedule. Briefly, they're the EOC roof hardening. There is a grant for that, but you do have a local match, so that would be covered out of this fund. That drone with the LiDAR that we spoke of, that IT had requested. There's a library book security. You've got the Bull Creek Pavilion and concession coming out of this fund. And then the augmented reality as part of our Parks and Recreation to tell the story at Princess Place and the archaeological dig site at Bing's. So those are the projects that are slated to come out of that fund next year. You've got your Marine Land Acres Drainage Basin Fund, which is 1318. This is collected by those non-ad valorem assessments to support that Marine Land Acres drainage improvement for the repayment of the gas tax loans on that project. There is no proposed increase to the assessment as it's anticipated right now, but this is just a collection of those funds and how it's being used. This is your ESL funds that remain. This is some old money that remain for Bay Drive Park improvements. This money came from Florida Communities Trust. It's Fund 1319. So that's what this is earmarked for, which is really Bay Drive Park. It's the only place it can be used. So we've got some scheduled improvements there that we're working on, but nothing that's going to be ready for next year, so it's sitting in reserves. This is your capital project fund for beach renourishment, Fund 1320. This is really the holding account for the Army Corps project. So you've got a little bit of money there. And then the next thing that I wanted to talk about was the fireflight replacement options. This is one of the items that we discussed last year as part of the budget process. We talked about ways to identify replacing fireflight. As you know, the aircraft is approaching 25 years old. I'm sharing with you two options that we identified that I believe would have a minimal impact on our budget. Both of these options are for the same aircraft platform that we're currently utilizing, which is the Eurocopter Airbus platform. We did reach out to find finance costs ranging somewhere between the 3.75 to 4%. Option one would be to take delivery of a new helicopter, which is currently in production. So it would be available from the manufacturer probably in about 3 months or so. And then option two would be to wait and then have one built for us next year. It'll likely take probably about 12 months, a little over 12 months for that. And just trying to walk through the two options. Option one is the current cost of that aircraft. The issuance cost would be for securing the financing bringing the total cost about 5.4 million. In talking to the manufacturer, there is a trade-in value on our current aircraft of 600,000. Possibly could be more if we sold it outright. I was told that there was some interest by another entity that may be interested in buying it, and that trade-in value or that cost would be a little bit higher than that 600,000. You currently have, we put 250,000 a year into a general fund reserve for the helicopter. Currently, you have 1.5 million sitting in that fund. There's an additional 1.5 million of surplus sitting in the debt service fund. Collectively, you've got what could be used for down payment with the trade-in value of 3.6 million, which brings the amount to finance for option one down to the 1.8 million. So when we looked at financing that 1.8 million at that ballpark rate, estimated payment over an 8-year term would be 267,000. 10-year term would be the 222,000. Somewhere between, I think it was the 8-year was that sweet spot of when you have the highest use resale value of the aircraft for trade-in. So that's why we broke it out at 8 years or 10 years. If you did option one, you're looking at about 470,000 over the term paid in interest and issuance cost. Option two would be if you were to wait and then, have one built for you next year. If our chief pilot oversaw the construction of the helicopter, we would save about 10%, kind of as like the project manager, if you will, over the construction of that aircraft. Again, so you see that coming off the top. The issuance cost of securing that financing, again, the same trade-in value, same reserves from helicopter and debt service would bring that amount that you're financing just over 2 million. That 2 million, showing the debt service payment over 8 years, brings that payment up to 300, 10 years, 250, a little bit more in interest and issuance costs collectively. Either one of these, I think, would have very little impact on your budget. The money used for the down payment is one-time money. It's not reoccurring money. We would never take reserve money and put it towards operating, which is an ongoing expense. So when you look at how much we're putting away each year right now as part of that reserve, that 250,000, that 250,000 that you're earmarking for a reserve would essentially go to the debt service payment. You would also, with the new aircraft, have a helicopter that's under warranty, so some of your maintenance costs would be reduced significantly during that warranty period. So I wanted to bring those two options to you as options that we were looking at that we wanted to bring forward. If you were to want to do something, option one is, as I mentioned, an aircraft that is currently available. It would require the board to make a commitment, letter of intent. They require 10% down to hold that aircraft, or wait and do option two, if that's what the board desired to do.
When aircraft with options, that means everything we need, right? FLIR and all this stuff.
As far as I know, it's equipped how you have it now. When we talked to the pilot, it was about, or we talked to the chief, it was about equipping it with what we had based on our needs. I know last year when we talked about it, and I'd have to verify, last year when we talked about it, I remember the sheriff, the FLIR is something used by law enforcement. It is something that he had mentioned he was working on getting a grant for, or that he would work to get a grant for that. So I don't know if it covers that option because it's not a requirement that we have for Fireflight. It's a law enforcement requirement. The other option would be is if it didn't include it, I believe it's like a $500,000, $500,000 to $600,000 expense. If it's not already included, it could be added. It could be offset by perhaps impact fees for law enforcement, or grant, or financed. But I would have to verify, what it's currently equipped with. I know when we talked to the folks when we were working on the budget. It was, what do we need in the equipment and what kind of platform and what does that look like? I'd have to go back and look at the detailed specs to see what all that breakdown was.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Sullivan?
Just, did you consider, this being nosy on my part, I guess, but the mosquito control people are thinking about a new helicopter. Is there any chance there could be some saving if we bought 2 helicopters at the same time, and to cover both? And if they were both the same models, that might help maintenance costs in the long run. But I don't know if you've even thought about that, but apparently they are seriously thinking about replacing their helicopter also. So I don't know if there could be some cost saving there or not.
I know in talking to the fire chief that Fireflight pilots have talked to mosquito control. Mosquito control actually allowed them to use their hoist, their engine hoist, to see how it would work. They were looking at converting away from the platform that they have, and they were looking at going to that same platform that we currently use. I don't know if there's an economies of scale in buying 2 from the same manufacturer or not. Option 1 in this case is significantly reduced over the 2024 price. So I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. I know that staff did talk to the mosquito control, but I don't know the detail of those conversations because I wasn't part of those conversations.
Just, if there was some cost saving, I'm just saying if there's any way to save any costs or standardization of the 2 helicopters, that kind of thing. Okay.
Well, can we make a decision on that?
I don't know if you all have comments on this or not. It's something that if we need to take board action, we can certainly add it to our next meeting, depending on the direction from the board, or we just continue to work through this. Option 1 would be the only thing that would require immediate action because it's currently available, and if it's not something we wanted to move forward on, then there is no time issue. You could, go to option 2. I just don't know if there's a discussion or comments from the board is all.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. O'Brien?
option 1, 8 years, and talk to the sheriff about assisting us in the FLIR expense, which I think he is willing to do from his,
Yeah.
somehow.
I agree. That's kind of my sense also. We ought to do 1 and get the sheriff's buy-in to give us the money however he raises it so we can put flair on it. I'm sorry, Leanne, did you have a comment?
No, I was actually concurring with option 1.
Yeah, I
Sullivan?
tend to agree with that. Is this a new helicopter? It just happens to be in the pipeline right now?
Brand new.
It's
Brand
currently
And
new.
what year model is it?
I would assume it's 2023. I don't know, Fire Chief, am I right? Yeah,
I don't
2023.
know. As long as it's new.
It's brand new.
And the warranty would be the same as the one in 24, although we get it.
Other than the cost increases in 2024. So, I mean, you'd have some significant savings. When I say, and that reduction of project management would require us to send Todd up to the manufacturer 4 times during the build. So it's not that 625, it is a savings of 625, but it does come with a cost that you're going to be down a pilot. You're probably going to have to pay overtime for the other pilot. So it's not a 1-for-1. I think option 1 is probably a better route to go, but I just wanted to provide both to you.
Any other comment, commissioners?
Yeah, we've had a pretty successful legislative ask season. I know we will be looking at priorities. Is this a potential priority item that we can start working on? I don't know what the other priorities look like, but if we could, is it potential to have negotiations with our legislators to see how this fits in our needs legislatively?
Certainly, you can have a discussion. We've identified 5 projects so far for next year that we're working on that we can brief the commissioners on, either in one-on-one or maybe a workshop. This was not one of them. Some of these items they view as it's a local need, and the local municipalities or communities ought to be taking care of these things themselves. So I don't know if you wait a year, because you wouldn't know this for a year from now, and you'd just be one more year further along with a helicopter that's going to depreciate even further, so.
But it doesn't deter us from asking for it if we go ahead and execute option one now. You can always say, hey, we could use $1.8 million from the legislature to help with our helicopter. We wouldn't have to ask them for the whole thing.
Did we ask for this last?
We did.
And
It
it didn't
didn't
go
make-
far?
Yeah. It didn't go
We
far.
asked, it didn't make it.
And I think part of the success that you have with your legislative asks is finding things that you know they support at the state level. This, I don't think, is one that got any traction, and if you look at the veto list of the things that they cut, there seems to be a common thread throughout them. The things that we're working on for next year as potential asks are things that we've already heard the state supports. I think that you have more success with aligning those asks. In other words, paying for the things locally that you should be paying for, and maybe, getting that benefit of getting them to fund things that they already support. So that's just my 2 cents, but
But we can't vote on that here because it's a workshop.
not here. I
so-
just wanted to get the consensus. I can bring it up tonight at the meeting to see if there is direction moving forward, because if we were to go with option one, it would be a letter of intent signed by the chair with a deposit, which would be 10%. That 10%, the roughly 5.3 million or 530,000, it would come out of the reserves that you already have allocated. So it's not that you have to find the money, you already have the money. But it would allow staff to start working towards that process, understanding that you're probably not going to take delivery until like October 1st. But at least it gets it moving towards that before somebody else buys it.
Well, I sense from what I've heard here on the commission that we should go ahead and bring it up tonight,
Okay,
I think.
thank you.
Yep.
And that's it. A lot of information. Our next presentation is going to be after we get the real numbers, the true value, July 1st. So we've got our next workshop on July 10th, where we will be presenting the tentative budget, and we begin the trim process, which will start establishing what that millage rate's going to be. A rate not to exceed. You can always go down from there, but at least setting what that millage looks like, and then setting a date for the first public hearing. I don't know if there's any information that you all would like me to spend more time on that we can either send out to you, or if there's another workshop. I have July 17th held as a tentative workshop as well, based on whatever discussion we have.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Sullivan?
Yeah, I agree with all that. There is a little time now. I would say the only thing I'd like to know for sure, if, you never know what's going to happen. Sometimes things happen, like they happened last year with the money, as to how much we were going to bring in. So as long as there's things continued along the lines they are right now, I think the schedule's fine. But any kind of, significant change in the meantime, I think we need to relook at things, if it changes anything dramatically. I mean, like the amount of money I just say, significant changes, you need to let us know right away. That will affect what we've been presented so far.
We won't know those numbers until July 1st.
Right.
So there's not going to be much of a change between now and then. We continue to go through the budgets, continue to retweak everything that we have, just continue building the budget, but we're not going to have the general fund portion until July 1st. There are a couple things out there that we started off the budget kickoff with that we're going to be coming back to you, the list of assets that we have and whether or not we need to look at what we do with those assets. When I say that, I mean, I'm talking about vacant land holdings that we have. Is there an opportunity to sell or put back on the tax roll properties that we have that we're not intending to use for any other purpose? There are other capital projects we're going to have to come back and build into the budget based on those legislative appropriations that we have. We've got $10 million coming for SMA for the residential, men's residential, and then the detox stabilization unit. Those need to be built back into the budget for you as part of that CIP. We have the 10 million for the fire station. They also approved the library grant program. They put 9 million into that, so you've got 500,000 coming towards the Bunnell Library. And then you also have your conservation lands, about 4.3 million. So those all need to be built back into the budget. Currently on our West Side Fire Station and our library HHS community building, both of those are at 60% design. As they continue to move forward, we're going to need to look to bring on a CMAR for the fire station. Now that we know that we have that legislative appropriation for next year, it'll probably be helpful that we engage the consultant to design that facility. They're already under contract now. When you talk about economies of scale, the same CMAR would probably make sense to oversee the construction of both of those. We're currently looking at opportunities for where the placement of that station will be in Bunnell, looking at land and possibly acquiring that. So there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that needs to be built into this budget. But the property valuation, we won't know till July 1, so.
Well, Mr. Chairman, yeah, my point I was making was, since we had our last meeting, the governor did sign the budget, and it was all pretty much good news.
Right.
The only one, I think, Palm Coast didn't get a fire station, I think, is one that.
That was the only one, right.
So that's the kind of thing I would mean. If all of a sudden we heard the governor vetoed a bunch of stuff, that would have a significant effect on what we're doing. So that didn't happen, but that's an example of what I'm talking about. Good for me.
I think, regardless of what the tax rate comes in at, even if it's slightly more, my takeaway is we still got work to do to build the reserves. So in the meantime, between now and then, what do we need to get with you on looking at priorities? How do you want us to spend the next little bit of time before the next meeting?
We can certainly do one-on-ones if you want to set up some time out of your schedule to come and talk, or whatever that looks like. I know we've got a conference coming up. I don't know if it's next week or the week after. The weeks all run together, but coming up soon. So not a lot of time, I don't think, between now and July 1, but certainly I look forward to whatever input you have, and if there's things that you'd like us to do different or look at, or internally, I met with the budget folks today. Every day we meet. This isn't like a one and done by any means. So we're continuing to look and tweak and how can we do things different, and even reevaluate some of the decision units that we put in there that we might not be able to fund moving forward. We wanted to present at least what I thought we could afford, and if we can't afford it, then maybe we just need to rethink it. So if you'd like to set up time, just let me know.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Ms. Petito, do you have anything else?
No, sir.
Now, we'll open it up to public comment on today's workshop. Anybody wishing to address the board or the commission, please come forward, state your name, and address your comments to me. You have 3 minutes.
Afternoon. My name is Tammy Sanner.
Microphone? Okay, go ahead.
My name's Tammy Sanner, and I'm
Better.
the Finance Director for the Family Life Center. Trish, our CEO, who I'm sure you all know, sends her regards. She was not able to be here today as she is out of town. I want to start by thanking you all for your past, present, and future support of the Family Life Center. The funding provided by the Flagler County Commissioners is crucial to the ongoing operations of Family Life Center services, and we are truly appreciative of your generous support for the survivors we serve. Family Life Center has been providing support for victims of domestic violence for 36 years and for victims of sexual assault since 2014. We are the only certified domestic violence center and the only certified sexual assault center in Flagler County. We provide crisis intervention, advocacy, safety planning, support groups, a 24-hour crisis helpline, assistance in obtaining injunctions for protection, mental health counseling, accompaniment, and support during forensic exams, court proceedings, and other meetings, and of course, our emergency shelter. What many people may not know, but what a victim realizes all too well, is that leaving an abuser can be very dangerous and is, in fact, the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence. Family Life Center's emergency shelter offers a safer alternative for victims when they do leave. While at our emergency shelter, residents receive basic essentials they need each day, such as food, clothing, and toiletries. They also have 24-hour access to our trained advocates who provide peer crisis counseling and who assist them in planning and preparing for the next step in their journey to safe, independent living free from abuse. All services are provided at absolutely no cost to victims. However, the operation of the emergency shelter is certainly not free. Whatever expenses you have in your home, we have in our shelter, 4 or 5-fold. Food, toiletries, laundry detergent, electricity, phones and internet, water, sewer, and garbage service, and property insurance, etc. I'm sure you and all of your constituents have felt the effects of the high inflation over the past couple of years, and so has the Family Life Center. In fact, in the past 2 years, we've had a 65% increase in food costs, a 17% increase in water, sewer, and garbage service fees, a 29% increase in electricity, and a 145% increase in our property insurance. Today, we ask that you consider these factors when finalizing your budget for the coming year and ask that you please consider not only continued funding, but also a funding increase for the Family Life Center to assist in meeting these ever-increasing expenses. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have a question. Can I ask?
Yeah, you can ask questions.
I understand you've had some unfortunate other lack of funding from previous, is that correct? Have you had any other consistent funders not continue to support?
So we did have, for the coming year, the United Way, and for the past several years has funded us at $50,000 for the coming year. The funding is only $30,000 and only for sexual assault services. It does not include any domestic violence funding for the coming 2 years. We also anticipate that we will see at least a 25% reduction in Victims of Crime Act funding, as that is something coming down the pike for the entire state, and possibly an additional 25% plus decrease next year in Victims of Crime Act funding as well.
Where does that come from? That's a state, or is that?
It's federal funding
Federal.
from the Office of, it comes through the Office of the Attorney General at the state level, but it's a federal funding from the Victims of Crime Act, where criminals, once convicted, pay into the fund, and it's throughout the country.
Thank you.
Did you get an explanation from United Way as to the reasoning for their reduced funding?
Apparently there was a glitch we feel that there was a glitch in our grant submission, where our submission showed that it was 100%, but on their end, the application was not 100%. And for that reason, we did not make the mark for the domestic violence funding.
Interesting, okay.
Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next speaker. Seeing no one else approach, I'll bring it back to the commission. Any other comments, commissioners? Anything else? Then I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
Moved and seconded, we adjourn. We are adjourned. Thank you.